campers! I hope you guys are enjoying the story so far. I know I am. Today we're going to be reading chapter 4. It's called Grumio the Many. It starts on page 71. Dire hunger and thirst pursued Atreyu. It was 2 days since he had left the swamps of sadness, and since then he had been wandering through an empty, rocky wilderness. What little provisions he had taken with him had sunk beneath the black waters with Artax. In vain, Atreyu dug his fingers into the clefts between the stones in the hopes of finding some little root. But nothing grew there, not even moss or lichen. At first he was glad to feel solid ground beneath his feet, but little by little it came to him that he was worse off than ever. He was lost. He didn't even know what direction he was going in, for the dusky grayness was the same all around him. A cold wind blew over the needle-like rocks that rose up on all sides. Blew and blew. Uphill and downhill he plodded, but all he saw was distant mountains with still more distant ranges behind them, and so on to the horizon on all sides. And nothing living, not a beetle, not an ant, not even the vultures which ordinarily follow the weary traveler until he falls by the wayside. Doubt was no longer possible. This was the land of the dead mountains. Few had seen them, and fewer still had escaped from them alive. But they figured into the legends of Atreyu's people. He remembered an old song. Better the huntsman should perish in the swamps, for in the dead mountains there is a deep, deep chasm, where dwelleth Grumio the Many, the horror of horrors. Even if Atreyu had wanted to turn back and had known which direction to take, it would not have been possible. He had gone too far and could only keep going. If only he himself had been involved, he might have sat down in a cave and quietly waited for death, as the greenskin hunters did. But he was engaged in the great quest. The life of the childlike empress and all of Fantastica was at stake. He had no right to give up, and so he kept at it, uphill and down. From time to time he realized that he had long been walking as though in sleep, that his mind had been in other realms, from which they had returned none too willingly. Bastian gave a start. The clock in the belfry struck 1. School was over for the day. He heard the shouts and screams of the children running into the corridors from the classrooms, and the clatter of many feet on the stairs. For a while there were isolated shouts from the street, and then the schoolhouse was engulfed in silence. The silence descended on Bastian like a great heavy blanket, and threatened to smother him. From then on he would be all alone in the big schoolhouse. All that day, all that night, there was no knowing how long. This adventure of his was getting serious. The other children were going home for lunch. Bastian was hungry too, and he was cold in spite of the many army blankets he was wrapped in. Suddenly he lost heart. His whole plan seemed crazy, senseless. He didn't want to go home, or he wanted to go home that very minute. He could just be in time. His father wouldn't have noticed anything yet. Bastian wouldn't even have to tell him he had played hooky. Of course it would come out sooner or later, but there was time to worry about that. But the stolen book? Yes, he'd have to own up to that too. In the end, his father would resign himself as he did all the disappointments Bastian had given him. Anyway, there was nothing to be afraid of. Most likely his father wouldn't say anything, but just go see Mr. Coriander and straighten things out. Bastian was about to put the copper-colored book in his satchel, but then he stopped. No, he said aloud in the stillness of the attic. Atreyu wouldn't give up just because things were getting a little rough. What I've started, I must finish. I've gone too far to turn back. Regardless of what may happen, I have to go forward. He felt very lonely, yet there was a pride in his loneliness. He was proud of standing firm in the face of temptation. He was a little like Atreyu after all. A time came when Atreyu really could not go forward. Before him lay the deep chasm. The grandiose horror of the sight cannot be described in words. A yawning cleft, perhaps a mile wide, twinned its way through the land of the dead mountains. How deep it might be, there was no way of knowing. Atreyu lay on a spur at the edge of the chasm, and stared down into the darkness, which seemed to extend into the innermost heart of the earth. He picked up a stone the size of a tennis ball. and hurled it as far as he could. The stone fell and fell until it was swallowed up in the darkness. Though Atreyu listened for a long while, he heard no sound of impact. There was only one thing Atreyu could do, and he did it. He skirted the deep chasm. Every second he expected to meet the horror of horrors, known to him from the old song. He had no idea what sort of creature this might be. All he knew that its name was Grumio. The deep chasm twisted and turned through the mountain waste, and of course there was no path at its edge. Here, too, there were abrupt rises and falls, and sometimes the ground swayed alarmingly under Atreyu's feet. Sometimes his path was barred by gigantic rock formations, and he would have to feel his way painfully, step by step, around them. Or there would be slopes covered with smooth stones that would start rolling towards the chasm as soon as he stepped foot on them. More than once he was within a hairbreadth of the edge. If he had known that a pursuer was close behind him and coming closer by the hour, he might have hurried and taken dangerous risks. It was that creature of darkness which had been after him since the start of his journey. Since then, its body had taken recognizable outlines. It was a pitch-black wolf the size of an ox. Nose to the ground, it trotted along, following Atreyu's tail through the stony desert of the Dead Mountains. Its tongue hung far out of its mouth, and its terrifying fangs were barred. The freshness of the scent told the wolf that its prey was only a few miles ahead. But suspecting nothing of his pursuer, Atreyu picked his way slowly and cautiously. As he was groping through the darkness of a tunnel under the mountain, he suddenly heard a noise that he couldn't identify because it bore no resemblance to any sound he had ever heard. It was a kind of jangling roar. At the same time, Atreyu felt the whole mountain about him was trembling. He heard blocks of stones crashing down its outer walls. For a time he waited to see whether the earthquake, or whatever it might be, would abate. Then, since it did not, he crawled to the end of the tunnel and cautiously stuck his head out. And then he saw. An enormous spider web was stretched from edge to edge of the deep chasm. And in the sticky threads of the web, which were as thick as ropes, a great white Luckdragon was struggling, becoming more and more entangled as he thrashed about with his tail and claws. Luckdragons are amongst the strangest animals in Fantastica. They bear no resemblance to ordinary dragons, which look like loathsome snakes and live in deep caves, diffusing a noxious stench and guarding some real or imaginary treasure. Such spawn of chaos are usually wicked or ill-tempered. They have bat-like wings, with which they can rise clumsily and noisily into the air. They spew fire and smoke. Luckdragons are creatures of the air, warmth and pure joy. Despite their great size, they are as light as a summer cloud, and consequently need no wings for flying. They swim in the air of heaven as a fish would swim in water. Seen from the earth, they look like slow lightning flashes. The most amazing thing about them is their song. Their voice sounds like the golden note of a large bell, and when they speak softly, the bell seems to be ringing in the distance. Anyone who has heard the sound will remember it as long as he lives, and will tell his grandchildren about it. But the Luckdragon Atreyu saw could hardly have been in the mood for singing. His long, graceful body, with its pearly pink and white scales, hung tangled and twisted in the great spider web. His bristling fangs, thick, luxuriant mane, and the fringes on his tail and limbs were all caught in the sticky ropes. He could hardly move. The eyeballs on his lion-like head glistened ruby red. The splendid beast bled from many wounds, for there was something else, something very big that descended like a dark cloud on the dragon's white body. It rose and fell, all the while changing its shape. Sometimes it resembled a gigantic, long-legged spider with many fiery eyes and a fat body encased in shaggy black hair. Then it became a great hand with long claws that tried to crush the Luckdragon. And in the next moment it changed into a giant scorpion, piercing its unfortunate victim with its venomous sting. The battle between the two giants was fearsome. The Luckdragon was still defending itself, spewing blue fire that singed the cloud monster's bristles. Smoke came whirling through the crevices in the rock, so foul-smelling that Atreyu could hardly breathe. Once, the Luckdragon managed to bite off one of the monster's long legs, but instead of falling into the chasm, its severed leg hovered for a time in midair, then returned to its old place on the black cloud body. And several times, the dragon seemed to seize one of the monster's limbs between its teeth, but bit into the void. Only then did Atreyu notice that the monster was not a single solid body, but it was made up of innumerable small steel blue insects, which buzzed like angry hornets. It was their compact swarm that kept taking different shapes. This was Grumio, and now Atreyu knew why she was called the Many. He sprang from his hiding place, reached for the gem, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stop! In the name of the childlike empress, stop!" But the hissing and roaring of the combatants drowned out his voice. He himself could barely hear it. Without stopping to think, he stepped foot on the sticky ropes of the web, which swayed beneath him as he ran. He lost his balance, fell, clung by his hands to keep from falling into the dark chasm, pulled himself up again, caught himself in the ropes, fought free, and hurried on. At last, Grumio sensed that something was coming toward her. With the speed of lightning, she turned about, confronting Atreyu with an enormous steel-blue face. Her single eye had a vertical pupil, which stared at Atreyu with inconceivable malignancy. A cry of fear escaped Bastian, and a cry of terror passed through the ravine and echoed from side to side. Grumio turned her eye left and right to see if somebody else had arrived, for that sound could not have been made by the boy who stood there as though paralyzed with horror. Could she have heard my cry? Bastian wondered in alarm. But that's not possible. And then Atreyu heard Grumio's voice. It was very high and slightly hoarse, not at all the right kind of voice for that enormous face. Her lips did not move as she spoke. It was the buzzing of a great swarm of hornets that shaped itself into words. "A 2 legs, Atreyu heard. "Years upon years of hunger, and now 2 tasty morsels at once. A lucky day for Grumio." Atreyu needed all his strength to keep his composure. He held the gem up to the monster's one eye and asked, "Do you know this emblem?" "Come closer, 2 legs, buzzed the many voices. "Grumio doesn't see well." Atreyu took one step closer to the face. The mouth opened, showing innumerable glistening feelers, hooks, and claws in place of a tongue. "Still closer," the swarm buzzed. He took one more step, which brought him near enough to distinguish the innumerable steel-blue insects which whirled around in seeming confusion. Yet the face as a whole remained motionless. "I am Atreyu," he said. "I have come on a mission from the childlike empress." "Most inopportune," said the angry buzzing after a time. "What do you want of Grumio? As you can see, she is very busy." "I want this Luckdragon," said Atreyu. "Let me have him." "What do you want him for, Atreyu 2 legs?" "I lost my horse in the Swamp of Sadness. I must go to the Southern Oracle, because only Eulala can tell me who can give the childlike empress a new name. If she doesn't get one, she will die, and all Fantastica with her. You too, Grumio." "Ah," the face drawled. "Is that the reason for all the places where there is nothing?" "Yes," said Atreyu. "So you know of them. But the Southern Oracle is too long of a journey for a lifetime. That's why I'm asking you for this Luckdragon. If he carries me through the air, I may get there before it's too late." Out of the whirling swarm that made up the face came a sound suggesting the giggling of many voices. "You're all wrong, Atreyu 2 legs. We know nothing of the Southern Oracle and nothing of Eulala, but we do know that this dragon cannot carry you. And even if he were in the best health, the trip would take so long that the childlike empress would die of her illness in the meantime. You must measure your quest, Atreyu, in terms not of your own life, but of hers. The gaze of the eye with the vertical pupil was almost unbearable. That's true, he said in a small voice. Besides, the motionless face went on, the Luckdragon has Grumio's poison in his body. He has less than an hour to live. Then there's no hope, Atreyu murmured. Not for him, not for me, not for you either, Grumio. Oh well, the voice buzzed. Grumio would at least have had one good meal. But who's to say it's Grumio's last meal? She knows a way of getting you to the Southern Oracle in a twinkling. But the question is, will you like it? What is that way? That is Grumio's secret. The creatures of the darkness have their secrets too, Atreyu Two-Legs. Grumio has never revealed hers, and you too must swear that you'll never tell a soul, for it would be greatly to Grumio's disadvantage if it were known. Yes, greatly to her disadvantage. I swear! Speak! The great steel blue face leaned forward just a little and buzzed almost inaudibly. You must let Grumio bite you. Atreyu shrank back in horror. Grumio's poison, the voice went on, kills within an hour, but to one who has it inside him, it gives the power to wish himself to any part of Fantastica he chooses. Imagine if that were known. All of Grumio's victims would escape her. An hour? Cried Atreyu. What can I do in an hour? Well, buzzed the swarm, at least it's more than all the hours you have remaining to you here. Atreyu struggled with himself. Will you set the Luckdragon free if I ask it in the name of the childlike empress? He finally asked. No, said the face. You have no right to ask that of Grumio, even if you are wearing Aran, the gem. The childlike empress takes us all as we are. That's why Grumio respects her emblem. Atreyu was still standing with bowed head. Grumio had spoken the truth. He couldn't save the white Luckdragon. His own wishes didn't count. He looked up and said, Do what you suggested. Instantly, the steel blue cloud descended on him and enveloped him on all sides. He felt a numbing pain on the left shoulder. His last thought was, to the Southern Oracle. Then the world went black before his eyes. When the wolf approached to the spot a short time later, he saw the giant spiderweb, but there was no one in sight. There the trail he had been following broke off, and try as he might, he could not find it again. Bastian stopped reading. He felt miserable, as though he himself had Grumio's poison inside him. Thank God I'm not in Fantastica, he muttered. Luckily, such monsters don't exist in reality. Anyway, it's only a story. But was it only a story? How did it happen that Grumio, and possibly Atreyu as well, had heard Bastian's cry of terror? Little by little, this book was beginning to give him a spooky feeling. And that's chapter 4.